In AD 49, the Emperor of Rome basically signed an eviction notice that, well, it displaced thousands of people from their homes.
Right, a massive forced migration.
Yeah. And he thought he was just, clearing up some local street riots in his capital city, like a minor bureaucratic cleanup.
Just another day at the office for an emperor.
Exactly.
Right.
But what he was actually doing, entirely by accident, I mean, was setting up the infrastructure, the financial backing, and the precise social network required to launch a global religion.
It really is the ultimate example of a butterfly effect, but, one driven by a very specific underlying architecture.
Right. So welcome to the deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us today.
Yes, glad to have you.
If you're listening right now and we are talking directly to you here, chances are you've looked at the chaotic events of your own life and wondered if anyone is actually steering the ship.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone hits that point.
Right. So today we're immersing ourselves in the ancient world. We're looking at the historical and theological records of the Apostle Paul's time in the city of Corinth.
Which is a fascinating period.
Oh, it's incredible.
Oh.
We're mapping out his maritime travel routes across the Mediterranean and really diving into the raw geopolitics of the first century.
And tying all of this history, geography, and theology together is one massive foundational concept, which is providence.
Providence, yeah. It's a word that sounds like it, belongs in a dusty seminary library.
Yeah, it sounds super academic.
Right. But the reality of it is intensely practical. We are talking about how Jesus serves as the ultimate controlling influence in the life and ministry of a believer.
How the invisible hand actually operates.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because the central tension we want to explore with you today is a deeply human one.
It really is.
How do you maintain your faith, your sanity, your forward momentum when you're stuck in that messy, terrifying space between a promise being made and its actual fulfillment?
Right. To really grasp what's happening in Paul's life here, we have to establish what providence actually means in this specific context.
Because it's not just luck.
Right? No, not at all. It's not just a synonym for luck or fate. The theological framework we're working from defines providence as God's power in sustaining and guiding human destiny.
Sustaining and guiding.
Exactly. It's the absolute assurance that Jesus controls and influences the believer, navigating them through the chaos to ensure they ultimately reach the intended destination.
Okay, sustaining and guiding human destiny. But how does that actually feel on a Tuesday afternoon when, everything is going wrong?
Well, it feels awful, let's be honest.
Right. The historical accounts dig deeply into this concept of the space between. They frame faith as the substance that fills the void between what we can physically see in front of us and the eventual realization of God's providence.
And the contrasts used to illustrate this in the text are really stark.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think about the biblical narratives. There is a terrifying, agonizing space between the moment you start filling empty water pots and the moment you actually taste the best wine at the wedding feast.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're just doing manual labor wondering what the point is.
Exactly. Or the space between pulling up heavy, soaking wet, completely empty fishing nets all night long and then that sudden boat-sinking catch of fish.
Right. And fundamentally for Christian theology, it's that devastating space between watching a death on a cross on Friday and staring at an empty tomb on Sunday morning.
Yes, that Friday to Sunday gap. For the early church, and honestly for anyone trying to navigate their faith today, life is lived entirely in that space between the current, often brutal reality and the final promise of the Lord's return.
I was reading through the references to the prophet Isaiah, that incredibly famous imagery from Isaiah 40 about those who wait for the Lord finding renewed strength.
Oh, right. Rising up with eagle's wings.
Yeah, exactly. We put that on coffee mugs and bumper stickers, but in reality, waiting is grueling.
It drains you completely.
It does. Which is why I think the book of Acts opens with such a profoundly human moment.
Yeah.
Jesus has just ascended into heaven, right? The disciples are left on the Mount of Olives. And what do?
They literally just stand there.
They just stand there, paralyzed, staring up into the empty sky.
Two men in white clothing have to physically interrupt them. They have to ask, why do you stand here looking up into the sky?
I find that so relatable. I mean, they are entirely focused on the departure, completely frozen in the tension of the space between.
Yeah, they know a promise was made, but the reality of their current physical environment is just...
an empty hill.
Exactly, just an empty hill. It's the uncomfortable reality of faith.
Because our brains don't like that.
No, biologically, we're hardwired to crave predictability.
Hmm.
We want visible outcomes. We want to know if we put in X amount of effort, we will receive Y result on a specific timeline.
Right. I imagine it like standing on a massive mile-long suspension bridge.
Okay, paint the picture.
But the entire structure is engulfed in heavy, blinding fog. You can look down and see the damp wooden planks directly beneath your boots, but you cannot see 5 feet in front of you.
Let alone the other side of the canyon.
Exactly. Faith, in that scenario, isn't cheerfully pretending the fog doesn't exist. It's not toxic positivity.
Right, you're not ignoring the danger.
No. Faith is the deep structural conviction that the engineers who built the bridge actually anchored the other end to solid rock. You're walking forward, step by terrified step, completely blind to the destination, trusting the architect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy gets to the very heart of the theology. True providence doesn't mean you get to magically teleport to the other side of the canyon.
I wish it did.
We all do, but it doesn't mean skipping the waiting period. Providence is the controlling influence that sustains your sanity and your footing through the waiting period.
It's the fuel for the journey through the fog.
Exactly.
So think about your own life right now as you listen to this. What does your specific space between look like?
It's different for everyone.
It is. Maybe it's a career path that feels completely stalled out, despite you doing everything right. Or maybe it's a fractured relationship you're trying to heal, or a period of intense, lonely personal growth.
You are in the fog.
You're in the fog. Now, consider how viewing that exact frustrating situation through the lens of providence changes the math.
What if that fog isn't a random delay?
Right, or a punishment. What if it's a space that is actively being guided, sustained, and engineered for a specific purpose?
It shifts the entire paradigm from passive waiting to active trust. But, theoretical theology is always easier to discuss than the abstract.
Oh, absolutely. It's very easy to talk about trusting the bridge engineer when you're safely sitting in your living room.
Which is why the historical record of Paul is so vital here. We get to see this theology of providence dragged out of the hypothetical realm.
And violently stress-tested.
Yes. Stress-tested in one of the most intimidating, secular, and chaotic environments of the ancient world.
Let's do it. Let's leave the abstract behind and walk right into the first century. So Paul has just left Athens.
Right, the intellectual capital.
Yeah, full of philosophers debating on Mars Hill. But he leaves there and travels about 50 miles west to a city called Corinth. And walking into Corinth was not just a change of scenery.
No, it was a massive, overwhelming shock to the system.
Tell us about the geography, because that scale is crucial to understanding the psychological pressure Paul was under.
Oh, Corinth was sprawling. The historical estimates put it at roughly 20 times the size of Athens at that time.
Wait, 20 times?
Yeah, we are talking about a booming, aggressive metropolis. It had a population north of 200,000 inhabitants.
Wow, for the ancient Mediterranean, that is staggering density.
It really is, and its location dictated its entire culture. Corinth sat on a narrow isthmus connecting the Peloponnese to mainland Greece.
So it had water on both sides.
Exactly. It had two major seaports, one on the east, one on the west. This made it the premier hub for global trade. If you were moving goods from Rome to Asia, you funneled them straight through Corinth.
So you have this constant churning population. Sailors on shore leave, wealthy merchants, transient laborers. It was a boomtown.
A total boomtown. And with that kind of unchecked transient wealth comes a very specific reputation.
I can imagine.
Corinth was infamous for its profound immorality. It was the absolute sin city of the ancient world.
Sin City.
Yeah. In fact, to call someone a Corinthian in that era was actually a widely used insult. It meant a person of highly degraded morals.
And the immorality wasn't just relegated to dark alleys either, right?
Not at all. It was institutionalized, celebrated at the highest levels of their society, primarily driven by the massive temple to Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love.
The geography of this is wild. Because the temple didn't just sit on a street corner downtown.
No, it was built on top of the Acrocorinth.
Right, which is this monolithic 1,857-foot flat-topped mountain of solid rock. It rises straight up right outside the city limits.
It literally cast a physical shadow over the streets of Corinth.
And this temple, the stats here are crazy. It boasted 1,000 religious prostitutes.
1,000, yes. The devotees of Aphrodite promoted ritualistic immorality in the absolute protected name of religion.
And they would descend from the mountain into the city every evening.
Like clockwork.
So, okay, put yourself in Paul's sandals. He's a Jewish rabbi. a traveling preacher with a message of purity and a crucified Savior.
A tough sell in Corinth.
A very tough sell. He's walking into a hyper-commercialized city of 200,000 people, dominated by a towering mountain dedicated to state-sponsored prostitution, surrounded by a transient, aggressive population.
And crucially, he's entirely alone at this point.
Right. His ministry partners haven't caught up to him yet.
The historical letters he wrote back to this city later, specifically 1 Corinthians chapter 2, they give us a window into his mental state.
What does he say?
He bluntly admits that he came to them in weakness and in fear and in much trembling.
He was terrified. I mean, he was a lone man standing in the thickest, darkest fog imaginable, staring up at that mountain.
But this is exactly where the concept of Jesus as the controlling influence begins to reveal itself, the invisible hand of Providence.
Because long before Paul even set foot on the road to Corinth, the board was already being set.
Yes, God was moving geopolitical chess pieces on a massive scale.
This is where we intersect with that eviction notice we mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
No.
Paul arrives in the city. He's afraid and isolated. He needs an income, he needs shelter, and he needs allies.
And almost immediately, he meets a Jewish man named Aquila, originally from Pontus, and his wife Priscilla.
And the backstory of why Aquila and Priscilla are even living in Corinth is fascinating.
Right, they weren't natives.
No, they had just arrived from Italy as refugees.
Because of the emperor.
Exactly. Emperor Tiberius Claudius had issued a sweeping imperial edict ordering all Jews to evacuate the city of Rome.
And secular Roman historians like Suetonius actually corroborate this event. The edict came down around AD 49.
So this is historical fact.
Yes. Claudius kicked the Jewish population out of the capital because of continuous violent riots breaking out within the Jewish community.
And the unrest, according to the records, was instigated over a figure the Romans spelled Christus.
Which historians almost universally agree is a slight misspelling of Christ.
I love that detail, a Roman clerical error. So you have massive, violent arguments breaking out in the streets of Rome between traditional Jews and Jewish followers of Jesus.
It gets so disruptive that the emperor, who likely couldn't care less about their theological differences, just wants the noise to stop.
He's just annoyed.
Right. So he issues a blanket decree.
Yeah.
Everyone out.
And that decree uproots Priscilla and Aquila. They lose their home, their local business connections, their community in Rome. They are forced to pack up their lives and travel hundreds of miles to a gritty, transient port city just to survive.
And when Paul bumps into them in Corinth, he discovers the crucial detail. They share his exact, specific trade.
They are tent makers, leather workers.
Yes. It was a rabbinic tradition that a Jewish scholar or rabbi must not profit from teaching the Torah. They were required to learn a physical trade to support themselves, so they wouldn't be a financial burden on the community.
Makes sense.
And Paul had learned leatherworking, likely back in his hometown of Tarsus.
So Paul moves into their home, and they go into business together. Now, I want to pause here, though.
Okay.
Because if I'm playing the skeptic, I'm looking at this sequence of events, and I'm troubled.
How so?
I hear you saying this is Providence, but look at the cost. An emperor gets annoyed by street noise and forcefully evicts thousands of innocent people. Priscilla and Aquila are victims of a massive geopolitical tragedy.
They lose everything.
They lose everything. And then Paul just happens to meet them because they both know how to cut leather. Some people would call that a lucky coincidence for Paul and a devastating tragedy for Aquila. How is a forced imperial eviction an example of divine sustaining love?
I completely understand the friction there. The human perspective naturally equates providence with comfort or fairness. If God is steering the ship, the waters should be calm, right?
Right. It should be smooth sailing.
But the theology we're analyzing posits that providence operates on a scale that is often entirely invisible and deeply uncomfortable for the people living through it.
The fog on the bridge.
Exactly. From Aquila and Priscilla's immediate perspective in AD 49, the Edict of Claudius was a catastrophe.
Pure tragedy.
But zoom out, look at the broader map of human history. What looks like a chaotic, unfair, purely secular political decree by a pagan emperor in Rome was actually the precise, calculated mechanism used to position those two specific people in Corinth at the exact moment Paul needed them.
Wow. God used the most powerful man in the known world, an emperor who worshipped pagan gods and knew nothing of Jesus, to essentially operate as a real estate agent and job recruiter for a terrified, traveling preacher in Greece.
That's a great way to put it. The emperor thought he was solving a local noise complaint. Providence was using his signature to build the foundation of the global church.
That is heavy.
Because of that brutal eviction, Paul wasn't homeless. He wasn't starving. He was brought into a home, given a steady income, and provided with two of the most brilliant, steadfast ministry partners he would ever have.
This is the controlling influence in action.
Exactly. It doesn't promise that evictions won't happen. It promises that the eviction is being woven into a masterpiece of provision.
I mean, that changes how you look at the worst days of your life. So, grounded by this newfound stability, Paul goes to work. And the work was not glamorous.
No, leatherworking in the first century was brutal.
It was physically exhausting. It smelled terrible because of the tanning process, and it occupied his days from dawn till dusk.
But every single Sabbath, he put the awl and the leather down, and he walked into the local synagogue.
And his methodology here is highly calculated. He didn't just walk in and shout at people.
No, the historical accounts use very specific terminology. They say he reasoned with them, and he tried to persuade both Jews and Greeks.
It was intellectual heavy lifting.
Very much so.
He's engaging in rigorous theological debate week after exhausting week, trying to prove from the ancient scriptures that the Messiah they had been waiting for was Jesus. He is planting seeds in the incredibly hard, rocky soil of Sin City.
But bivocational ministry, working a grueling manual labor job 6 days a week, and then engaging in intense public debate on the seventh, that is a recipe for profound burnout.
Yeah, nobody can sustain that forever.
Providence provided the initial life raft with Priscilla and Aquila, but for the mission in Corinth to actually break wide open, the dynamic had to shift.
Right, the leatherworking shop was just the beachhead. The narrative transitions here as reinforcements finally arrive. Silas and Timothy, Paul's ministry partners, finally make their way down from Macedonia to join him. And they don't just bring friendship.
No, they bring capital.
Which changes the game.
The arrival of Silas and Timothy allowed Paul to radically shift his focus. The texts indicate they likely brought a financial gift from the churches in Macedonia, perhaps from the believers in Philippi, who were known for their generosity.
And this injection of support changes everything for him. The record says Paul became wholly absorbed with proclaiming the word.
He could finally put down the leatherworking tools.
Yeah. He devotes all of his energy to testifying that Jesus was the Christ.
But there is a universal law of spiritual physics at play here.
Oh, I know where this is going.
The moment you push all your chips to the center of the table and escalate the mission, the resistance escalates in direct proportion.
The pushback, yeah, the hostility from the synagogue leaders spikes dramatically. They oppose him, and the language used implies they began to actively revile and blaspheme him.
They were verbally tearing apart the character of Jesus and attacking Paul viciously.
The intellectual debate was over. It had devolved into toxic, hostile territory. And Paul's reaction to this is one of the most intense, visceral moments in the entire account.
He performs a highly symbolic, deeply cultural gesture that carried massive weight in the ancient Near East.
He shakes out his garments.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. He stands in front of his abusers, violently shakes the dust out of his clothes, and declares, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am guiltless. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles."
It's powerful.
Now, to modern ears, that sounds like a dramatic temper tantrum, like he's just storming out of a bad business meeting.
Right, but that's not what's happening at all. In the ancient world, shaking the dust off your garments or your sandals was a terrifying declaration of absolute final severance.
It's a physical way of saying, I will not even take the dirt of this room with me. We are completely cut off from one another.
And it connects directly back to the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel.
Oh, chapter 33, right?
Yes. In Ezekiel 33, God gives the analogy of a watchman standing on the city wall. If the watchman sees an invading army coming and blows the trumpet to warn the city, but the people ignore the warning and are killed, their blood is on their own heads.
Because the watchman did his job.
Right. But if the watchman gets lazy or scared and doesn't blow the trumpet, the blood of the city is on his hands.
So by shaking out his garments, Paul is invoking that exact legal and spiritual framework.
He is declaring to the synagogue, I blew the trumpet, I worked the leather, I reasoned with you for months, I delivered the message of salvation, and you have violently, aggressively rejected it. My liability is officially over.
It's an emotional emancipation.
That's a great phrase.
He is releasing himself from the crushing burden of their rejection. And then, in a move that is almost comically bold, he declares he is taking his message to the Gentiles. He walks out of the synagogue. And where does he go?
He moves his entire operation literally right next door.
I mean, that is an unbelievably provocative move.
It really is.
He sets up shop in the house of a Gentile named Titus Justus, a man who worshiped God but wasn't a full Jewish convert. and his house shared a wall with the synagogue that had just thrown Paul out.
I can only imagine the sheer fury of the synagogue leaders.
Right. Every Sabbath, they have to watch people walk past their door to go next door and listen to the guy they just expelled.
And the tension goes nuclear because it actually works.
It works too well. Crispus, the president of the synagogue, the highest-ranking religious official in the local Jewish community, converts.
He believes in the Lord with his entire household.
A defection of that magnitude would have sent shockwaves through the entire city.
Oh, absolutely. And following his lead, many other Corinthians, these people steeped in the gritty, transient, immoral culture of the city start hearing, believing, and being baptized.
It is an explosive revival happening inside a pressure cooker.
The threat of physical violence from the humiliated traditional leaders would have been suffocating.
Because Paul is having massive success, but he's living with a target on his back.
And that is exactly when Jesus intervenes personally.
The midnight vision.
Yes. The historical record describes a vision Paul experiences in the middle of the night. The Lord speaks to him and says, "Do not be afraid, but speak, and do not be silent, because I am with you, and no one will assault you to harm you, because I have many people in this city."
I have many people in this city.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that single phrase opens up one of the deepest theological paradoxes in the entire text.
Let's get into it.
It's the intersection of divine election and human evangelism.
Break that down, because on the surface, it sounds a little confusing. Jesus is saying he has many people in Corinth, but those people haven't even heard the message yet.
Right. They're currently out drinking at the seaport or walking up the mountain to the temple of Aphrodite. They aren't believers.
So what does he mean?
From a theological standpoint, Jesus is revealing the architecture of providence. He is saying, I have people in the city who are already set apart for salvation. I know who they are, even if you don't. Their destiny is already secure in my hands.
But here is the paradox. Logically, human nature would hear that and get lazy.
Oh, sure.
If I am exhausted, terrified, facing a hostile mob next door, and God himself shows up in my bedroom and says, relax, I've already chosen a bunch of people in this city to be saved, my immediate response is going to be, fantastic, you don't need me, I'm going to pack my bags, take a vacation to the Greek islands, and let you magically sort them out.
Exactly.
Why sweat and bleed for an outcome that God has already guaranteed?
It's the ultimate question regarding the sovereignty of God. Human logic assumes that if the end result is predetermined by providence, human effort is rendered meaningless.
Right. What's the point of the watchman?
But the theology of Paul's life argues the exact opposite. The guarantee of providence doesn't breed apathy. It is the essential fuel that breeds courage.
The guarantee is the reason to do the work.
Precisely. Think about Paul's reality. He had been reasoning, pleading, and debating only to face violent rejection. It would be so easy to conclude that his words were just bouncing off deaf ears, that Corinth was simply too wicked, too hard, too lost.
But the vision changes the reality.
Because God said, I have people here. Paul suddenly knew with absolute certainty that his preaching would not be in vain.
He knew that when he blew the trumpet, someone was guaranteed to wake up.
Yes. The success of the mission wasn't dependent on Paul's eloquence or his ability to manipulate the crowd. It was secured by the controlling influence of Jesus. God's responsibility was the miraculous work of saving the human soul.
And Paul's only responsibility was the simple obedience of opening his mouth and proclaiming the truth.
Exactly.
I want you, the listener, to really internalize this because it is incredibly liberating. Whatever task you are facing right now, whatever terrifying space between you are navigating, if you apply this theological lens, it strips away the crushing, paralyzing pressure of having to manufacture the ultimate outcome yourself.
We carry so much anxiety because we believe we have to force the puzzle pieces of the universe to fit together.
Yet you don't have to save the world. You don't have to guarantee the success of the startup or force the person you love to change or orchestrate the perfect timeline. Your mandate is shockingly simple. Execute the task directly in front of you with absolute faithfulness.
Just keep walking on the foggy bridge.
Yes. The structural integrity of the bridge over the canyon is the engineer's problem. You just take the next step.
And that realization allowed Paul to stay in Corinth, right next door to his enemies, for a full year and 6 months, teaching the Word of God.
It gave him an unbelievable reservoir of psychological resilience.
And he was going to need to tap every drop of that reservoir because the promise in the midnight vision had a very specific caveat.
Right. Jesus promised that no one would assault him to harm him. He didn't promise that the opposition would just magically evaporate.
Far from it.
And eventually, the simmering tension next door boils over. The local religious conflict is about to escalate from a neighborhood dispute to a Supreme Court showdown, bringing Paul face to face with the crushing weight of the Roman legal system.
Which brings us to the pivotal involvement of a Roman official named Gallio.
The streets of Corinth were just the warm-up for this showdown. The Jewish leaders who oppose Paul finally organize a coordinated physical strike.
They've had enough.
Yeah, they grab Paul, drag him through the streets, and bring him forcefully before the Bema, the judgment seat in the center of the city.
And the man sitting on that seat is Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia.
Give us the historical context on Gallio, because he's a fascinating figure.
He is, and his background is critical to understanding the stakes. Gallio was not a low-level beat cop or a local magistrate. He was a Roman proconsul.
Which means what, exactly?
Essentially, he's the governor of the entire province, appointed directly by the Senate. He was also the older brother of Seneca, the famous Stoic philosopher and advisor to the emperor.
Okay, so he's highly educated, well-connected.
Yes, and known throughout the empire for his incredibly mild and amiable temperament.
So bringing a case before Gallio is like bringing a case before the Supreme Court. His rulings don't just solve local squabbles. They establish legal precedent that other governors across the vast Roman Empire will look to.
Exactly. And the charge the leaders present to Gallio is brilliantly calculated.
What do they say?
They say, this man is persuading people to worship God in a way contrary to the law. Now, they aren't talking about Jewish law here. They are talking about Roman law.
Right, because the Romans generally didn't care who you worshipped as long as it didn't disrupt the Pax Romana,
Right.
the Roman peace.
Right. Judaism was officially recognized as a religio licita, a legal, permitted religion. The Jews were allowed to worship freely.
So the accusers are essentially telling the governor, this guy Paul is not one of us. He is starting a rogue, unauthorized, illegal cult. He is a threat to the state.
It's a matter of life and death. If Gallio agrees that Christianity is an illegal religion, Paul can be executed, and the entire Christian movement across the empire can be systematically hunted down by the Roman military.
The stakes could not be higher. Paul is standing before the highest judge in the land. He has been dragged through the dirt. He knows his life is on the line.
He undoubtedly has a brilliant, eloquent, intellectually rigorous defense prepared.
Oh, for sure. The text says he is just about to open his mouth to speak, and Gallio shuts the entire trial down before Paul can even utter a single syllable.
The mild-mannered governor simply refuses to hear the case.
I love this part. Gallio looks at the accusers and basically says, look, if this was an actual crime, some piece of serious villainy or fraud, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you, but this is just an internal squabble about your own specific words and names in your Jewish law. Go settle it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things.
And he commands his guards to physically drive them away from the judgment seat. Case dismissed.
It is a breathtaking display of Roman bureaucratic apathy.
Gallio draws an absolute, unyielding line separating Roman state law from internal theological disputes. From his perspective, the Christian Jews and the traditional Jews are all just part of the same religion arguing over semantics.
But the dismissal immediately sparks chaos in the plaza.
Right. The crowd gets involved.
The Greek crowd watching the trial sees that the governor is annoyed with the Jewish leaders, and they seize the opportunity to unleash their own latent anti-Semitism. They grab Sosthenes, who is the newly appointed president of the synagogue.
The guy who replaced Crispus after he converted.
Exactly. They grab Sosthenes and they begin to viciously, physically beat him right there in front of the judgment seat.
And Gallio's reaction to a man being beaten in his own courtroom is what makes this moment so historically jarring.
The record states plainly, yet none of these things were of any concern to Gallio. He just watches it happen.
He does nothing.
And I have to be honest, I struggle with this. I'm trying to track with the concept of providence being this comforting, sustaining influence of Jesus. But here, the supreme judge of the province sits on his throne, completely indifferent, while a man is violently beaten by a mob.
It's hard to reconcile.
It is. That is cold, brutal callousness.
Yeah.
How can we possibly look at this violent, apathetic moment and call it the controlling influence of God?
It is a deeply uncomfortable scene. But to see the providence at work, we have to look past the immediate, visceral violence in the plaza and analyze the massive, long-term legal ramifications of Gallio's calculated apathy.
Okay, walk us through that.
Gallio was enforcing Roman jurisdiction to a fault. By watching Sosthenes get beaten and doing absolutely nothing, he was sending a chilling, unmistakable message to every religious leader in the province.
Which was?
Do not ever bring your internal theological disputes into my courtroom again. I do not care about your religion, and I will not protect you from the mob if you waste the time of Rome.
It was boundary setting through sheer brutal indifference.
Exactly. But look at what that indifference accomplished on a geopolitical scale. By officially throwing the case out and telling the Jews that Paul's teachings were just a matter of their own internal law, Gallio inadvertently made a monumental legal ruling.
Oh.
He officially classified Christianity as a subsect within Judaism.
Oh, I see it. Because Judaism already possessed the status of a legal protected religion in the empire, Gallio just legally grandfathered Christianity into that exact same protection.
Precisely. Gallio's apathy provided a massive, impenetrable legal umbrella over the early church. Other Roman governors would look to his precedent. For years following this trial, the Romans officially regarded Christianity as merely a variation of Judaism, granting it full Roman toleration and protection.
And history shows us that this legal shield held firm until around AD 64, when Emperor Nero infamously blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome, completely severing them from Judaism and initiating horrific state-sponsored persecutions.
But for those intervening 15 years, the church had a window of peace.
A 15-year window.
Providence used the sheer annoyance and apathy of a pagan Roman bureaucrat to construct a legal fortress that allowed the Christian movement to spread like wildfire across the Mediterranean basin.
They built infrastructure, they established communication networks, they wrote the letters that would become the New Testament, all without the constant threat of imperial execution.
When Jesus spoke to Paul in the midnight vision and said, "No one will assault you to harm you," he wasn't promising a magical, invisible force field that would repel the mob.
Yeah.
He was talking about orchestrating the rigid, unfeeling machinery of the Roman legal system to legitimize the ministry. The judge throwing the case out was the fulfillment of the vision. God used a politician's indifference to alter the trajectory of human history.
And that legal precedent is very likely what gave Paul the confidence years later to appeal his case directly to Caesar when facing corrupt judges in Palestine. He knew that the foundational Roman law, thanks to Gallio, viewed his ministry as legal.
Absolutely.
Now, as for Sosthenes, the man who was beaten in the plaza, there is a fascinating historical footnote.
This is an amazing detail.
In the opening greeting of the letter of 1 Corinthians, written years later, Paul mentions a brother in the faith named Sosthenes, who is helping him write the letter.
And many scholars believe it is the exact same man.
The man who led the charge to execute Paul and was beaten by the mob for his failure eventually found his way into the very church he was trying to destroy.
The invisible hand of Providence leaves absolutely no thread untied.
It is a stunning turnaround. And with the legal shield firmly established and the Corinthian church anchored by strong local leadership, the nature of Providence in Paul's life shifts gears once again.
The survival phase is over.
Yeah, the expansion phase begins. Providence moves from sustaining Paul in one hostile location to expanding the network across the entire geographical map.
Which requires us to look at the massive maritime journey that concludes this chapter of Paul's life.
He's leaving Corinth.
Yes. He has been in Corinth for over 18 months, which is an incredibly long stay for him. But eventually, the season changes. He decides it is time to leave. And crucially, Priscilla and Aquila, the tent makers who took him in, pack up their lives to go with him.
But before they even get on the boat, there is a deeply culturally significant moment. They travel to Cenchrea, the eastern port city of Corinth, and there Paul has all of his hair cut off because he had taken a vow.
To a modern listener, cutting your hair for a religious vow sounds bizarre, but this is deeply rooted in ancient Jewish law, specifically the Nazirite vow outlined in the Book of Numbers.
Explain how that worked, because it seems odd for a Christian apostle who just spent 18 months fighting the traditional synagogue to suddenly be performing a strict ancient Jewish ritual.
A Nazirite vow was a period of intense, voluntary dedication to God. During the vow, you abstained from grapes and wine, you avoided contact with dead bodies, and you did not cut your hair.
So the hair was a sign.
Yes, the growing hair was the visible symbol of your consecration. When the period of the vow was completed, often taken as a massive expression of thanksgiving for deliverance from danger, you would shave your head and offer the hair as a sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, so Paul, having survived the terror of Corinth, the mob, and the Supreme Court trial, takes this vow to explicitly thank God for the protection.
Exactly. It's a beautiful picture showing that Paul hasn't abandoned his Jewish heritage. He is utilizing the ancient structures to express his profound gratitude to Jesus.
So, with his hair shorn, he, Aquila, and Priscilla board a ship and sail east across the notoriously dangerous Aegean Sea. Their destination is Ephesus.
And if Corinth was a booming metropolis, Ephesus was the crown jewel.
Oh, yeah. It was the capital and the chief commercial center of the Roman province of Asia Minor, boasting a population of between 200,000 and 250,000 people. It was a massive strategic cultural hub.
They arrive in Ephesus, and Paul follows his standard operating procedure. He goes straight to the synagogue and begins reasoning with the Jews.
And surprisingly, given his past experiences, they actually like him.
They do. They ask him to stay longer and keep teaching.
But Paul refuses. He tells them, "I will come back to you again if God wills." He is fiercely determined to keep moving. He wants to reach Jerusalem for the upcoming festival season, and he is racing the clock before winter weather makes the Mediterranean completely impassable for ancient sailing vessels.
So he boards another ship, but here is the critical strategic maneuver that reveals the depth of Providence. He leaves Priscilla and Aquila behind in Ephesus.
He leaves his best friends, his financial supporters, the couple who risked their lives for him, alone in a massive pagan city of 250,000 people.
And Paul sails away.
Yeah, embarking on an arduous journey across the Mediterranean Sea, all the way down to Caesarea, which is the chief port servicing Jerusalem. He goes up to Jerusalem because it's geographically elevated to greet the church and offer his thanksgiving. And then he travels north to his home base in Antioch in Syria.
This massive, exhausting circuit officially concludes what historians call his second missionary journey.
But the truly fascinating work of Providence doesn't follow Paul on the boat.
No, the camera lens of history stays in the city of Ephesus with Priscilla and Aquila.
God didn't move them there just to abandon them. He moved them there for a highly specific surgical interception.
Enter a man named Apollos.
Tell us about Apollos.
The historical text introduces us to a Jewish man named Apollos, a native of Alexandria in Egypt. Now, Alexandria was essentially the Oxford or Harvard of the ancient world.
Very prestigious.
It was a massive center of academic learning, philosophy, and massive libraries. And Apollos is the quintessential product of that environment. He is an eloquent, highly educated orator, deeply versed in the ancient scriptures.
So he's a powerhouse.
He is a Hellenistic Jew, meaning his worldview is shaped by sophisticated Greek rhetoric, but his heart is fiercely devoted to God. He possesses immense raw talent.
He has a brilliant mind, a commanding public presence, and boundless enthusiasm. The text notes that he spoke and taught accurately the facts about Jesus.
He is preaching fearlessly in the Ephesian synagogue, captivating the crowds. But there is a glaring problem.
What's the problem?
His theology has a massive blind spot. He only knows the baptism of John the Baptist, a baptism that was primarily about repentance and preparation. He has completely missed the latest, most crucial revelations. He doesn't know about Christian baptism, the filling of the Holy Spirit, or the full implications of the resurrection.
So he has all the passion and the historical data, but his software urgently needs an update.
That's a perfect analogy. And who just happens to be sitting in the back row of that Ephesian synagogue listening to this brilliant but incomplete orator?
Priscilla and Aquila, the blue-collar tent makers.
Right.
The couple who were violently expelled from Rome by the emperor, who met Paul by divine coincidence, who sewed leather with him for a year and a half, absorbing his masterclass in theology, and who were then seemingly abandoned in Ephesus.
They immediately recognize both Apollos' staggering potential and his critical theological gaps.
And how they choose to handle this situation is an absolute masterclass in leadership, emotional intelligence, and humility.
Because think about the power dynamics here. Apollos is an educated powerhouse commanding the room. Priscilla and Aquila are tradespeople.
Right. They could easily have stood up in the middle of his sermon, asserted their authority as close personal friends of the Apostle Paul, and publicly humiliated him for his bad theology.
But they don't leverage their connections to shame him. They handle his pride and his potential with incredible grace.
The text says they took him aside privately into their home, and they explained the way of God to him more accurately.
It's like watching a master craftsman dealing with a young, arrogant prodigy.
Yeah, the prodigy is swinging the hammer with immense wild power, but his grip is slightly off. The master craftsman doesn't yell at him in front of the crew.
No, he quietly pulls him aside.
He places a rough, calloused hand over the prodigy's hand, shifts his fingers a fraction of an inch, and suddenly the prodigy's power is focused and twice as effective. They invited Apollos into the intimacy of their home, shared the deep truths they had learned in the trenches with Paul, and refined his immense talent without breaking his spirit.
This quiet living room conversation is the culmination of the massive geopolitical moves we discussed earlier. Providence isn't just about one superstar apostle doing all the work.
No, it is an infinitely complex board where every single piece matters.
God literally rearranged the Roman Empire to get Priscilla and Aquila out of Italy.
He used a pagan emperor's eviction notice to push them to Corinth so they could be trained by Paul.
He used the apathy of Gallio to keep them alive.
And then he used Paul's travel schedule to drop them in Ephesus at the exact right moment to intercept and upgrade a young man who was destined to become one of the greatest defenders of the early church.
Because look at the trajectory of Apollos after this living room meeting. Fully equipped with the complete truth, he burns with the desire to cross the sea and go back to Achaia.
Specifically to Corinth.
Yes. The Christians in Ephesus are so confident in him that they write letters of recommendation.
And when Apollos arrives in Corinth, he steps right into the foundation Paul built. He begins to vigorously, publicly debate the Jewish objectors, proving from the ancient scriptures that Jesus was the Christ.
Paul later wrote about this dynamic in his letters, famously saying, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God has been making it grow." The tag team is perfectly executed across years and oceans.
It is worth pausing to honor the legacy of Priscilla and Aquila here. They are the unsung heroes of this narrative.
They truly are. They exhibit a remarkably strong, unified marriage, always operating as a team.
They possess incredible resilience and flexibility. I mean, we've watched them uproot their entire lives and businesses twice in one story without a hint of bitterness.
And their courage is legendary. Paul writes later in his letter to the Romans, explicitly thanking Priscilla and Aquila, stating that they literally risked their own necks for his life.
They weren't just making tents. They were standing between Paul and the mob. They were fiercely committed to Christ, deeply hospitable, and willing to quietly pass their knowledge on to the next generation in the privacy of their living room.
Through their lives, we see that the controlling influence of Jesus operates simultaneously on the macro and the micro level.
It dictates the decrees in the high courts of Roman emperors, and it guides the quiet, humble conversations over a dinner table.
Exactly.
So after traveling thousands of miles across the ancient Mediterranean, navigating violent riots, surviving Supreme Court legal battles, and sitting in on private theology lessons, what does all of this actually mean for us?
Yes, what's the takeaway?
As we address you, the listener, we want to weave these massive historical threads back into your daily reality. We started this deep dive by asking how you maintain your faith and your sanity when you are stuck in the space between the promise and the fulfillment.
What the gritty historical reality of Paul's life demonstrates is that providence, the invisible hand sustaining your destiny, almost never operates in a clean, straight, comfortable line.
Never.
It utilizes the infuriating, unfair edicts of broken human systems. It uses the lonely, physically exhausting hours of grinding out a living at a job you might hate.
It uses the sudden, unexpected arrival of friends, the sheer apathy of people in power, and the gentle corrections of humble mentors to execute a flawless, overarching architecture.
You do not get the vibrant, world-changing church in Corinth without the terrifying, oppressive shadow of the Acro-Corinth forcing Paul to his knees.
And you do not get the brilliant, refined ministry of Apollos without the traumatic, heartbreaking eviction of Priscilla and Aquila from their home in Rome.
The trauma was the transportation's triumph.
The trauma was the transportation.
Wow. As we conclude our analysis of these events, I want to offer a final perspective on critical thinking regarding your own life.
Please do.
While we are living and breathing in the space between while we are walking on that foggy suspension bridge, unable to see the other side, we almost never have the capacity to recognize the providence at work.
In the moment, it just feels like chaos.
Exactly. It feels like unfair delay. It feels like an eviction. But it is only when we are granted the grace to look backward at the map of our lives, just as we have looked backward at the geographical map of Paul's grueling second missionary journey, that the controlling influence becomes breathtakingly, undeniably clear.
Hindsight is the lens where the muddy, chaotic waters suddenly resolve into a perfectly engineered blueprint.
The map only makes sense after you have survived the sea.
So we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder on your own this week. It's a question that builds on the reality of everything we've explored today.
A question for the space between.
If Paul's greatest, most vital protections and provisions came disguised as terrifying Roman emperors, hostile, violent crowds, and sudden, unwanted career changes, what currently feels like an absolute roadblock or an unfair disaster in your life right now, that might actually be the invisible hand of Providence secretly setting the stage for your most important chapter.
That is the ultimate profound test of faith in the space between.
You don't need a perfectly clear, brightly lit path if you intimately trust the guide. You don't need to see the solid rock on the other side of the canyon if you know the engineer has guaranteed the structural integrity of the bridge. Just take the next step.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep looking for the hidden connections in the chaos, and keep seeking out those profound moments of clarity hidden in the history all around us.